You only do what you are and you are what you think. So you've got to work on who you be. Your identity is vital. So making dreams come true is where we got to just prior to the break. I have a simple process that I follow. It's a 4-stage process, which is something I've been doing for probably 8 years. In fact, probably longer than that. And it's a simple process, but if you discipline yourself to use it, because what we're talking about here, folks, is the subconscious brain. How many of you know that, well, someone said before they want to use the 95% of their brain that they're not using. Simple fact is 60% of your brain you don't want to control. It's the unconscious part that actually controls the blood pumping and all of that sort of stuff. You don't want to be in charge of thinking about blood pumping. You know, that's a crazy thing. What we want to do, though, is harness that part of the subconscious that is absolutely vital. Why is it that we want to harness our subconscious? Why do you think? Stop the automatic or create new automatic positive. Because here's a simple thing. Idealization. Well, let me give you what is idealization. If, let's say, for example, how many of you know when you've set goals in the past, how many of you have ever set a goal that you're earning 100 grand now, so you set your goal at 125 grand? How many of you have done something like that where you give yourself 20% more than you're doing now as a goal because you think, oh, well, that's reasonable, okay? Well, in this process, what we're aiming to do is come up with what's ideal. What is your ideal life? Idealization. Come up with this amazing dream picture of your life. What would it be like when you finish? You know, when you created it, what is it going to be like? And to do that, sometimes you have to stretch the brain. Sometimes you have to sit down and say, okay, how many houses will we have? Where will they be? How many cars will I have and where will they be? What is this? Does that make sense to people? What is that next stage for you? And totally go ideal. You know, when you look at your jewellery cabinet, how big is the jewellery cabinet going to be? You know, what's going to be in there? I'm not just talking about the ladies, I'm talking about the guys. You know, how big's your watch collection going to be? Think about that for a second. Your pen collection. Because you have to start collecting stuff like that when you've got a lot of money, because there's not much else to buy. I'm serious. Like, my wife has 22 Louis Vuitton handbags. Why? Because she can. You've got to collect stuff like that when you get rich. There's not much else to collect. How much money will you donate to charity in the ideal world? You know, I've run my own charity for the last 3 years. We've now melded it in with Youth Off the Streets, and I'm now on the board of Youth Off the Streets, and we run the Queensland end of that. But, you know, and the joy you get from doing those sorts of things. What will you do? What will the ideal world look like for you? What colour will your helicopter be? What will you name your boat? Not just will you have a boat, what will you name it? And these are the things where we actually have to create vivid reality. Does that make sense? So that we can do steps 2 and 3. Visualization, verbalization, materialization. Let me just take you through this. Idealization, as we've just talked about, is the ultimate stretch. Choose, and this, I come back to this word choice. Choose that it is already yours. Once again, folks, if you don't do this, do you think any of the how-to will work? No, because you don't have any why-to. The subconscious will self-sabotage you and you'll create more frustration in your life. So I'm always amazed. The really logical people come into a seminar and say, yeah, but Brad, give us the good stuff. This is the good stuff. Because without this, nothing else works. So we set up the ideal. Then we go to the next stage, visualization, where you've got to run the picture in your mind. 10 minutes of a morning, 10 minutes of a night time, every single day. Some people call this meditation. I call it sitting quietly. Now, I don't care what you call it, as long as you do it. What are you doing when you do this, by the way? What are you doing with your subconscious brain? Reprogramming it, aren't you? You are training your subconscious brain because it has no reasoning power, the subconscious brain. Its only power is to process what you give it. No power other than that. So this is where we're planting seeds. What sort of seeds are we planting? Wealthy, successful, healthy, congruent. The seeds of where we want to be. Who we choose to be. So then we also have to add to that the verbalization part. And this is where your I ams come into it. I got you started to do that, your 20 I am statements. Now, can you expand on those I ams that you wrote? Yes or no? Yeah. By the way, is this stuff simple, yes or no? Yeah. Does it take discipline, however, to do it? See, and this is where the challenge comes in, because the only difference in my books between average performers and wealthy and successful performers is discipline, self-discipline. Unfortunately, once again, I go back to the scholastic system. Where are you taught discipline comes from in the world? Other people, aren't you? Parents, schooling, teachers. So we get this discipline from everywhere else, and then when we get to be an adult, all of a sudden, hang on, you've got to have self-discipline. It's why people get business coaches, because they need to get some discipline. So we go on to the next stage. Materialization. Now, whether you like it or not, doing those first three will just make it all happen for you. There is no process. It will create, because you will start doing things differently. You'll start doing things in a way that is totally different to what you've done before, because you're thinking in a different way. Step one is idealization. Step two is visualization. Step three, verbalization. And step four is the materialization. When you get this in your mind, it will work. The seeds you plant manifest into reality. As long as you do it with discipline. How many of you, when you run a sales team, how many of you, anyone in the room runs a sales team? How many of you run a sales team? Do you realize that your major job is to discipline them? Do you all realize that? That's your major job, to keep them disciplined, to do the things they should be doing every single day? It's almost like you become a traffic cop with them. Wouldn't it be easier to just teach them self-discipline? Where does self-discipline start? What flip chart did we do earlier on today that starts self-discipline? Playing above the line. Time to move on. Let's just do a quick thing here, because how many of you in this room are good at time management? How many of you are really bad at time management? How many of you realize you can't manage time? The clock keeps going no matter what you do. However, your greatest asset in life, everyone call it out for me, your greatest asset in life is what? Your time. If your time is your greatest asset, would it not be vital then to learn how to manage it? Yes or no? So I don't call it time management, I call it self-management. What do we call it? Self-management. And that's where I want to follow on that self-discipline trail. Because let's say we're talking about sales. Do you need to be highly in control of your time when you're doing sales? Yes or no? How about when you're investing in stuff? Yes or no? Yeah, you need to manage this thing. So your time target looks kind of like this. Stephen Covey wrote a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. How many of you have read that one? Excellent. How many of you use everything he teaches? Excellent. See, imagine how much growth potential there is if you even used what you knew. Imagine how far ahead of life you would be. So in his book, he talked about the urgency, importance, payoff. There's a payoff between urgency and importance. He does it in a matrix. I don't like square matrices because you don't really know where the heck should I be. That's why I like it as a target rather than a matrix. So on the outside, what sort of things do we have out there, folks? Call it out for me, everybody. What sort of things are not urgent and not important? Watching television, yep. Surfing the net just for the fun of it. Computer games. Window shopping. Yeah, but I'm talking about window shopping. There's a difference between going shopping and... See, I don't go shopping, I go buying. I'm going to buy something and then I'm going. I'm not going to the shops to just hang out there. The only time I go to the shops to hang out is on a Saturday morning. I take my daughter because she loves just looking at everything. She'll go around the shops and for 2 hours she'll just stare at everything and everyone. High stimulation for her. But I always end up buying stuff while we're there. So, not urgent, not important. This is what we call a dimension of distraction. This is where what we're doing is basically killing time, marking time, wasting time. We're distracting ourselves from the realities of life. As we step into things that are urgent but also still not important. Unfortunately, most people in business are in this category approximately 50% of their day. Because they're doing things that just show up. They're putting out fires. They're dealing with crises. Call this a dimension of delusion. Because you're deluded into thinking you're achieving something. How many of you can relate to this state on certain days of the week? Excellent. By the way, if you're in that state a lot, you will do stress more often. Why? Because you're not achieving anything. You're running around busy. How many of you had one of those days where you get to the end of the day and you think, shit, I've been busy all day, but what the heck did I do? You know? How many of you had a week like that? No, don't put your hand up, that's too bad. So we move into the next round and we go to things that are urgent, but now they're what? They are important now. Urgent and important. It's called the dimension of demand. That's where you want to be working. If you are working, that's where you want to be working. The next stage, I call it the zone, is where things are not urgent, but they are important. Not urgent, but they are important. Is getting educated not urgent, but important? Yes or no? Yeah. How about spending time with your family? Is that not urgent, but it is important? Yeah. How about health and fitness, keeping fit, doing exercise? You know, these things. In business, what sort of things are not urgent, but they are important? Systematizing your business. What else? Planning. What else? Measuring, doing the stats of the business. It's not urgent, but it's bloody important. By the way, if you don't do these things that are not urgent and they are important, eventually will they get to be urgent? Yeah. Think about health, you know. You don't do the health stuff that's not urgent, but it is important. Eventually it gets to be urgent and important. Unfortunately, some of you wait for stuff to drift out from the center before you start doing it. So just an interesting one. If last week was an average week for you, I want you to go through that and just list off what percentage of your week did you spend in each of those areas? If last week wasn't an average week, go back to the last average week you had. Just quickly note it down, what percentage in each of those 4 areas. Out in distraction, oh yeah. Did anyone in the room have the majority of their time in distraction in their average week? Did anyone have their majority in distraction? How much? So not very productive weeks, they lead to, in about a month from now, having a stressful week, don't they? Life will go like that. You'll have cycle, oh yeah, distraction, distraction. Oh, holy mackerel, let's get to it. Anyone have the majority of their week in delusion, doing things that were urgent but not really important? Excellent. How did that feel? Did it feel like a waste of a week? Yeah, absolutely. How about demand? Who had the majority of their week in demand? So does that mean the majority of you aren't going to raise your hand, or you didn't have a week last week? Okay, demand. Demand feels like a good week, doesn't it? Because we achieved a lot in a demand week. How many of you had the majority of your week last week in the zone? A couple of you, good. Do they feel like good weeks? Yeah, they feel like great weeks. Okay, you've got to balance. In my books, you've got to balance between demand and zone. Demand and zone. Got to build in a little bit of distraction every now and again. Keep it balanced that way. Yes? Distraction can be called leisure, but I would rather think of leisure as in the zone where you're doing things, because you can do things that are important that are also leisure. You can build your leisure so it's spending time with your family. Because sitting in front of the television with your family is not spending time with them. Okay? That's time by yourself. It's called distraction. A friend of mine from northern Canada had a simple formula for success in life. And I want to tell you the story because I think it's a vital story, where he actually learnt this from. As a young kid, he grew up in Africa. His family is Indian, like continent India, not North American Indian. His family's Indian. He grew up in Africa and he now lives in Canada. He's a very, very successful property investor in Canada. And I learned a lot from Mo about property and about life and stuff. But one of the most interesting things is when he was a kid growing up in Africa, one of the things about the villages there is they have generally a magician or a storyteller. And so he got an interest in magic, and later in life he was in Texas and he tells how he went into a magic store, and while he was there, there was a lady who she basically bought in her father who'd just passed away, his whole box of magic stuff, and her father had been quite a famous magician. And so in this box was just all of this really great stuff, and they were pricing up all of the books to put them on the shelf to sell. And there was one envelope there, and they'd put a price tag on it of $25, and it was like 5 sheets of paper. And Mo said, "What's in the envelope?" And I said, "Oh, it's how he performed a certain magic trick." So he opened this envelope up, and it was apparently this guy's most famous magic trick of how he did it. What he actually did was, this magic trick is, let's say he's on stage right now, all of a sudden he would disappear and he'd show up sitting in that seat over there and tap Bruce on the shoulder kind of thing. And then he'd show up over in this corner and then down the back, and then he'd be back on stage. And this was how he did this trick. But also in the same envelope, this guy had written how I succeeded in life. And it was his one simple thing, and that's what Mo teaches now as his success formula. But interestingly enough, that one, you know, that trick, the magic trick of showing up in different spots, Mo sold that magic trick to David Copperfield for $250,000 US. He bought it for $25. Anyone like that return on investment? You know, but it's interesting because Mo said, but still more important was what was on the other piece of paper. I didn't sell that to Copperfield and it's worth more. And this is what he said. He said, in life, whenever you're faced with a decision, you always have to ask one question. And the question was, what do I fear most? What do I fear most? And guess what his answer to be the most successful thing in life, the person you can be in life is? Then you do it. What do I fear the most? And then do that. And it's interesting, when I started applying this in life, guess what happened to my life? It sped up. Because I started doing everything I feared. What did that do to my comfort zone? Expanded it massively. So how much more was I doing every day? Stacks more. If you are confronted by something that you fear and you go and do it, it changes you totally. You cannot go back. Talk more about that on Wednesday. So now we're going to get into some business stuff, because I think it's vital for us to understand business if we're going to understand wealth. Why? When we take a look at it, there is a simple fact of life when it comes to rich people. And that is that they have generally three things in common. Number one thing I found in common with most rich people is that they have a business. Now, some of them started it, some of them inherited it, others have bought a business that they then built up. My formula is I generally buy businesses and build them up. Why? I can sell them for a lot more, but also I can buy them for a lot less than they're worth. See, what does it cost? Let's just take a look at markets just for a second. What is the most liquid market in the marketplace out there? If you were to take something that you're going to invest in, what is the most liquid market that we can invest in? Liquid. In other words, do you all know what I mean by liquid? The share market, isn't it? Why is the share market the most liquid? Because it's turning over every few milliseconds. If you put something up for sale, can it be sold inside a second? Yes or no? Yeah. You put a business up for sale, though. See, at one end of the spectrum is the stock, well, basically foreign exchange is probably the most liquid market.